The sound was not of this world. It was a monstrous grinding groan of tortured metal, a colossal that ripped through the placid Sunday afternoon ambience of Harmony Creek Estates. Karen Covington, president of the Homeowners Association and curator of suburban perfection, was holding a crystal flute of mimosa, mid-anecdote about the unacceptable vibrancy of the Petersons' new petunias. Then, the sound? It was followed by a cataclysmic crump-thwump that vibrated through the flagstones of her immaculate patio, sloshing champagne onto her cream-colored linen blouse. Every head at her exclusive HOA brunch snapped towards the street, and there, in the sun-drenched, tree-lined perfection of her cul-de-sac, was the impossible. Barb's pearl-white Lexus SUV, the one Karen had explicitly told her to park in the driveway of the house next door, was no longer on four wheels. It was on its side. More accurately, it was halfway through a grotesque slow-motion pirouette, its undercarriage exposed to the heavens like the pale belly of a dying whale. It teetered for a horrifying second before crashing completely onto its roof with a final soul-shattering crunch of collapsing steel and shattering glass. The alarm began to shriek, a frantic digital scream in the sudden, profound silence of the neighborhood. Karen stood frozen, the mimosa flute slipping from her fingers to shatter on the patio. Her mind, a finely tuned instrument of rules, regulations, and aesthetic righteousness, refused to process the data. It was simply wrong. An error in the matrix of her perfectly curated world. And the source of that error was standing calmly on his porch, holding a tablet. Mr. Chen, the engineer. The man who had, for 3 months, been a thorn in the side of Harmony Creek's very Harmony. It had all started, as most neighborhood cataclysms do, with something small, a matter of convenience that, in Karen's mind, was a matter of principle. When David Chen moved into the house at 12 Serenity Lane, next to her own palatial corner lot at number 14, he seemed acceptable. The moving van was gone by 6 p.m. He didn't have any loud music, and his lawn was mowed within 48 hours. A good start. The problem arose from the unique geography of their lots. Karen's home, the jewel of the cul-de-sac, had a grand, circular driveway in front, but its 2-car garage was accessed by a separate, narrow drive on the side, right next to Chen's property line. Chen's house had a massive, 3-car-wide, dead-straight driveway that was almost always empty. He owned a single, modest sedan that he kept in his garage. The issue was guest parking. According to the Harmony Creek covenants, conditions, and restrictions CC&Rs, which Karen knew by heart better than she knew her own anniversary, street parking was forbidden for more than 4 hours. When Karen hosted her brunches, her book club, or her charity planning committees, parking became a logistical nightmare. Her circular drive was for aesthetic presentation only, and her side drive was too narrow. Her guests were forced to park on adjacent streets and walk, a trek that was not only inconvenient but also disrupted the unbroken visual flow of the neighborhood, a concept Karen had championed in the last HOA newsletter. Mr. Chen's vast empty driveway was the perfect solution, a simple, elegant, neighborly solution. Her first attempt at a resolution was a masterclass in what her husband, Richard, called her benevolent dictatorship style. She had baked a gluten-free artisanal apple coffee cuckoozing apples from her own meticulously pruned tree and brought it over one Tuesday afternoon. Mr. Chen answered the door. He was younger than she expected, maybe late 30s, with a quiet, observant demeanor. He wore a simple gray t-shirt and jeans, and his eyes, behind a pair of wire-rimmed glasses, seemed to be constantly analyzing. Mr. Chen? Hello, I'm Karen Covington, from next door. Number 14, she said, her voice a practiced melody of warmth and authority. I just wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood properly. She presented the cake. Oh, thank you, Miss Covington, that's very kind, he said, taking the cake with a slight, almost imperceptible hesitation. Please, call me David. Of course, David, and you must call me Karen, she smiled. A radiant, confident expression she had perfected over years of leading committees. I'm the president of the HOA, so if you have any questions at all about our community standards trash can placement, seasonal decoration timelines, approved lawn care services, please don't hesitate to ask. I've read the CC&R, he said simply. They were quite thorough. Excellent. Karen beamed. It's so refreshing to have a neighbor who values order. Which brings me to a small matter of neighborhood synergy. He tilted his head slightly. Synergy? Yes. You have a wonderfully spacious driveway, David, truly an exemplar of the form. I, on the other hand, am frequently entertaining. And our community's parking regulations, while essential for maintaining our aesthetic integrity, can be a bit of a puzzle. I was hoping we could come to a mutually beneficial arrangement. She paused for effect. I'd love to be able to offer my guests the use of your driveway during my social functions. It would only be occasionally, of course. It would be a tremendous help and would go a long way towards fostering the kind of community spirit we cherish here in Harmony Creek. David Chen looked from her face, to her house, and then to his own empty expanse of pristine concrete. He was silent for a long moment, his gaze unreadable. Karen maintained her smile, confident that the combination of her charm and the coffee cake was an irresistible force of neighborly persuasion. I appreciate the offer, Karen, he said finally, his tone polite but firm, but I'm afraid I'll have to decline. I prefer to keep my property for my own use. Karen's smile faltered for a microsecond. It was like a computer program encountering an unexpected null value. She had run this scenario in her head a dozen times, and in none of them did it end with a simple no. Oh, she said, recovering quickly. Well, perhaps you don't understand. This isn't just for me. It's for the neighborhood. When cars are parked blocks away, it looks transient, disorganized. Your driveway is the solution. I understand your position, he replied, his voice still maddeningly calm. But my answer is the same. It's my property. I'm not comfortable with it being used as a parking lot. Thank you for the cake. And with that, he gave a small nod and gently closed the door. Karen stood on his welcome mat, a mat that was noted with a sudden spike of irritation, a non-approved shade of forest green rather than the mandated hunter green or charcoal gray. She was stunned, not just refused, but dismissed. The audacity was breathtaking. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a unilateral declaration of non-cooperation. The decision had been made in that moment. Mr. Chen had failed the community spirit test. He had chosen selfishness over synergy. And in Karen's world, such a choice had consequences. Her first move was official. She scoured the CC&Rs, her sacred text, for leverage. There was nothing, of course, that could compel a resident to share their driveway. It was a loophole, a flaw in the otherwise perfect system. So, she moved to Phase 2, enforcement. The first notice arrived in his mailbox 2 days later. It was printed on official HOA letterhead, a crisp ivory stock she'd selected herself. Violation. Notice property at 12 Serenity Lane, dear Mr. Chen. A routine neighborhood inspection has revealed a violation of the Harmony Creek CC&Rs Article 4, Section 2B, landscaping and aesthetic maintenance. Your lawn has been measured at an average height of 3.7 inches, exceeding the maximum permissible height of 3.5 inches. Please remedy this violation within 48 hours to avoid a fine of $50. In Harmony, Karen Covington, President HCE Hosh, had measured it herself that morning, using a special lawn ruler she kept for just such occasions. She'd had to lie flat on her stomach on the dew-covered grass to get an accurate reading, but it was worth it. It was about sending a message. 2 days later, she received an email. Subject: RE violation? Notice, dear Ms. Covington. Thank you for your notice. The lawn has been mowed. For your records, I have attached a notarized certification from One Lawn Services confirming the current height is 3.1 inches, along with a time-stamped photo. Also, for your reference, your welcome mat appears to be the Crate and Barrel Everweave 2024 model in sandstone, which was discontinued from the approved color palette in the 2023 HOA addendum. The current approved shades are oatmeal and pebble gray. Just a friendly observation. Regards. David Chunkerin stared at the email, her blood pressure climbing. He was mocking her. A notarized certification. A comment about her own welcome mat. He was weaponizing the rules against their very author. This was no longer a simple dispute. It was war. The following weeks became a silent, petty battlefield. Karen cited him for having his recycling bin visible from the street for 65 minutes. Past the 7 p.m. deadline on Tuesday, he replied with an email containing a link to a motion-activated security camera feed, time-stamped to show he'd moved it at 6:58 p.m., and a polite inquiry as to whether her seasonal wreath contained nano-organic glitter. A violation of Article 6, Section 9D, that she fined him for a non-uniform exterior lightbulb color temperature, noting his porch light was 3000 K, warm white, while the community standard was 2700 K, soft white. He responded by filing an official HOA information request for the calibration records of the color temperature meter used to make the assessment. He was meticulous, he was infuriating, and his driveway remained defiantly, insultingly empty. The silence that followed the departure of the last police car was heavier than any sound had been all day. It was a thick, judgmental silence, filled with the unspoken accusations of her fleeing guests, the lingering scent of burnt electronics, and the monumental, upside-down failure of Barb's Lexus squatting in the middle of her perfect street. The party was over. The wreckage remained. Karen stood on her patio, a general surveying a lost battle. Her cream linen blouse was ruined, a Rorschach blot of mimosa and dread. Her husband, Richard, who had weathered years of her HOA crusades with the stoic indifference of a man who simply wanted a quiet life and a good scotch, was finally broken. I'm going to my brother's, he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. He didn't look at her, focusing instead on a crack in the flagstone. I need to think. Barb's husband called me. Their lawyer will be in touch. They're suing us, Karen, not the HOA. Us. The word was a squeak, but it was an HOA matter. It was about parking standards. Did the HOA tell you to repeatedly trespass? Richard's head snapped up, his eyes blazing with a cold fire she'd never seen before. Did the HOA tell you to ignore a registered letter? Did the HOA tell you to treat that man like your personal whipping boy until he finally, God help us, whipped back with a goddamn car flipper? is on you, Karen, your obsession. Your ridiculous, petty kingdom. He didn't wait for a reply. He walked inside, and 10 minutes later, she heard the smooth growl of his Mercedes pulling out of the garage, the one on the narrow side drive, now feeling more like an escape tunnel. The sound faded, leaving Karen truly alone for the first time. The shock began to recede, replaced by a feeling she was far more comfortable with, a burning, all-consuming rage. This wasn't her fault. It couldn't be. She was the protector of this community, the guardian of its property values and its very soul. David Chen was the aggressor. He was the one with the secret, weaponized driveway. He was the menace. Richard didn't understand. Barb, in her grief, was being irrational. The police were blinded by legal loopholes. She was the victim here, and she would not be defeated. Her first calls were to the 2 board members she knew she could count on. Gerald, the treasurer, a nervous man whose spine was composed of jelly and a desire for Karen's approval, and Cynthia, the secretary, woman who thrived on gossip and lived vicariously through Karen's power plays. She summoned them for an emergency strategy session in her living room, which still bore the faint, festive scent of brunch. He has built a weapon, Karen declared, pacing in front of the fireplace. She had changed into a severe knit pantsuit, her battle armor. A weapon, in the middle of our family-friendly residential community. What if a child had been playing on that driveway? What if it had been a delivery person? He has created a clear and present danger to everyone. In Harmony Creek, Gerald wrung his hands. But the police said it was legal, Karen. The permits are irrelevant. She snapped, whirling on him. Gerald flinched. The permits are a smokescreen. We are the Homeowners Association. Our covenants, conditions, and restrictions supersede city permits on matters of community, aesthetic, and residential character. He has violated the spirit of Harmony Creek, and it is our duty to act. Cynthia, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of conspiracy, leaned forward. What can we do? He seems to have an answer for everything. Because we've been fighting him on his terms, Karen said, a new steely resolve hardening her voice. We've been nibbling at the edges with lawn heights and welcome mats. We need to attack the foundation. We need to find the one rule, the one covenant so powerful, so fundamental, that he cannot possibly argue his way out of it. We are going to audit his entire existence in this neighborhood. Her decision was made. This would be her counteroffensive. She wasn't just going to get the trap removed. She was going to find grounds to have him declared a resident non grata. She would make his life in Harmony Creek so legally and procedurally unbearable that he would have no choice but to sell his house and leave. The next 48 hours were a blur of caffeine and righteous fury. Karen's dining room table, normally reserved for elegant dinners, was buried under a mountain of documents. There were the foundational CC&Rs, a 3-inch binder of dense legalese. There were the yearly addendums, the architectural committee, guidelines, the minutes from every HOA meeting for the past decade. She even had Richard's nephew, a paralegal, email her the full county zoning laws and the original developer's master plan for the Harmony Creek Estates subdivision. Gerald and Cynthia became her reluctant lieutenants in this paper war. Gerald, a CPA by trade, was tasked with cross-referencing city building codes with HOA architectural mandates, his face pale with stress. Cynthia was in charge of sifting through years of meeting minutes, looking for any precedent or forgotten ruling they could twist to their advantage. Karen was the commander, the grand strategist, fueled by a bottomless well of resentment and black coffee. Nothing. Gerald moaned late on the second night, rubbing his eyes. The man's house is a fortress of compliance. His fence is the exact right height. His paint is the approved Sherman-Williams Quiet Fawn. His roof shingles have the correct 30-year warranty rating. He's perfect. Nobody's perfect, Karen snarled, flipping aggressively through a binder labeled Zoning in Use. There's always something. And then, she found it. It was tucked away in a dusty addendum from 2005. A section written to prevent someone from, as she recalled, running a commercial dog grooming business out of their garage. Article 9, Non-Conforming Property Use. It was beautiful in its sweeping, ambiguous power. It read, no property within Harmony Creek Estates shall be used for any purpose other than that of a single-family residence. Any physical or functional modification to a property that fundamentally alters its residential character, or which introduces commercial-grade or industrial-grade machinery not typical of or essential to a standard suburban dwelling, is strictly prohibited without prior written application and unanimous approval from the Architectural Review Committee. That's it, Karen breathed, her finger tracing the words. A triumphant smile spread across her face for the first time in days. That's the silver bullet. Cynthia peered at the page. Industrial-grade machinery. You think the car flipper counts? Of course it counts, Karen declared, her energy surging. It's a hydraulic ram. It's a piece of industrial equipment. It is not typical or essential to a standard suburban dwelling. He never applied for approval. And the Architectural Review Committee, she paused, savoring the moment, is me, Gerald, and Brenda Peterson. I think I can guarantee he won't be getting unanimous approval. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. they would hit him with a violation of Article IX. It wasn't about a fine, it was about a core breach of the covenants. The penalty wasn't a $50 fee. It was the forced removal of the offending equipment. It was unimpeachable. Karen spent the next morning crafting the violation notice. It was her magnum opus, a 2-page document of pure, concentrated bureaucracy. She cited the article, defined industrial grade using a dictionary extract, and detailed the potential negative impact on the serene residential character of the community. It concluded by summoning him to a mandatory hearing of the full HOA board in 72 hours' time, where the Architectural Review Committee would present its findings and the board would vote on the resolution. The immediate and complete removal of the unapproved industrial vehicle repositioning system. She delivered it herself. She didn't ring the bell. She affixed it to his front door with a piece of heavy-duty tape, placing it right at eye level. As she walked away, she felt a heady rush of power returning. The world was righting itself. The system was working. Her system. The night of the hearing, the community clubhouse buzzed with a nervous energy. The entire 5-member board was present. Karen, Gerald, and Cynthia sat on one side of the long table, a united front. The other 2 members, Mark and Helen, sat on the other, looking deeply uncomfortable. About a dozen homeowners, drawn by the scent of drama, sat in the gallery chairs. The story of the flipped Lexus was already the stuff of legend. Karen, in her sharpest black blazer, called the meeting to order. "We are here to discuss a serious violation at 12 Serenity Lane," she began, her voice resonating with solemn authority. She laid out the case with practiced ease, framing Chen as a rogue agent who had installed a dangerous piece of industrial equipment without approval, threatening the safety and harmony of their neighborhood. She read Article IX aloud, her tone imbuing it with the weight of scripture. "The Architectural Review Committee has met," she announced, gesturing to a shell-shocked Gerald and a smug Cynthia, "and we have unanimously found this installation to be a severe breach of covenant. We recommend the board vote in favor of immediate removal." Right on cue, the door to the clubhouse opened. David Chen walked in. He was not dressed in his usual t-shirt and jeans. He wore a crisp button-down shirt and pressed slacks. He looked .com/professional and entirely unintimidated. He carried a slim, black briefcase. Double quotes. "Mr. Chen, you are late," Karen said, annoyed by his placid entrance. "My apologies," he said, his voice quiet but clear in the silent room. "I was finalizing my presentation." He walked to the empty chair opposite them and sat. The silence in the house at 14 Serenity Lane was a living entity. It was the suffocating silence of defeat, a stark contrast to the usual hum of self-importance that had been the background music to Karen Covington's life. Her husband, Richard, had not returned. His texts were brief, single-worded responses from a lawyer's office. Barb, her former best friend, was now simply the plaintiff. A name on a legal document that had arrived by courier, demanding a sum of money so large it made Karen feel physically ill. At the local market, she saw Helen and Mark from the board in the produce aisle. They spotted her, exchanged a panicked look, and abruptly abandoned their cart to flee towards the deli counter as if she were contagious. The censure had stripped her of her title, but the public humiliation had stripped her of something far more valuable, her identity. She was no longer Karen Covington, president and protector of Harmony Creek. She was the crazy lady whose neighbor flipped an SUV. She was a punchline. In the first few days, despair was a thick fog. She'd wander her own home, a museum of her former glory, touching the silver-plated gavel from her first election, straightening the framed certificates of community appreciation. They felt like artifacts from another life. But Karen's spirit was not built for prolonged despair. It was a machine designed to run on indignation, and as the fog of sorrow began to burn away, it was replaced by the laser-focused heat of obsession. The target of that obsession lived next door. The servers, the satellite dish, the low, incessant hum. David Chen had not just beaten her. He had made a fool of her while working on his real endgame. The battle for the driveway had been a trivial skirmish he'd won with ease to secure his flank. Now, with her neutralized, he was free to continue his real work. And Karen, stripped of all official power, decided to create a new, unofficial position for herself. Chief investigator of the Chen conspiracy. Her grand living room window, which offered a perfect, unobstructed view of Chen's property, became her command post. She'd sit for hours in Richard's now-vacant leather armchair, a pair of high-powered bird-watching binoculars in her lap. She watched the deliveries arrive, nondescript cardboard boxes from electronic suppliers, thick spools of shielded fiber-optic cable, and once a crate so heavy it required 2 men and a hydraulic dolly, labeled with words she didn't understand, but which sounded ominous. Cryogenic cooling manifold. Her home office, once the nerve center of the HOA, was repurposed. She took down the color-coded schedule of committee meetings and the map of approved mailbox colors. In its place, she erected a large corkboard. This became her investigation board. In the center was a grainy, zoomed-in photo of David Chen taken with her phone. Around it she pinned a constellation of clues. A printout of the server rack model she'd identified through a Google search, enterprise-grade blade server chassis, a hand-drawn sketch of the satellite dish, a list of the delivery truck's license plate numbers, a timeline of his comings and goings, noted with meticulous precision in her neat, flowing script. 7:14 a.m., garage door opens. Chen departs in sedan. 6:32 p.m., Chen returns. 11 p.m. to 3 a.m. approx. Lights in garage data center remain on. This was no longer about community standards. This was about national security, or corporate espionage. Or perhaps he was the kingpin of some vast dark web empire. Every theory was more thrilling than the last, and each one served to recast her not as a petty tyrant, but as a lone Cassandra, the only one brave enough to see the danger everyone else ignored. Her first attempt at active intelligence gathering was a dismal failure. Convinced his trash must hold the key, she waited for a moonless Tuesday night, the eve of garbage collection, dressed head to toe in black Lululemon athletic wear. Her idea of spy gear, she crept out of her house and across the dew-slicked lawn that separated their properties. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a thrilling drumbeat of purpose. This was it. She was an operative in the field. She reached his large city-issued recycling bin and slowly, quietly, lifted the lid. The stench of stale energy drinks hit her first. She pulled out a small pen light and peered inside. It was a crushing disappointment. Everything was shredded. Not just paper, but cardboard, plastic packaging. Even the aluminum cans seemed to have been run through some sort of high-powered. It was all a useless, confetti-like mulch. He was covering his tracks. The thought sent a shiver of validation down her spine. Suddenly, a blinding light flooded her. She froze, a deer in the headlights, her hand still inside the bin. Everything okay over there, Karen? The voice belonged to Mr. Gable from across the street. He was standing on his porch, holding a powerful flashlight. His new motion-activated security camera, the one she had almost cited him for because it had a visible wire, was mounted right above his head, its little red recording light blinking directly at her. "Oh, Mr. Gable." "Hello," she stammered, snatching her hand back. I thought I saw a raccoon. A very large one. Just making sure it hadn't gotten into the bins. HOA business. You know, pest control." Gable stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. "In your neighbor's bin at midnight, right, Karen?" He clicked off his flashlight and went back inside, leaving her alone in the darkness, her cheeks burning with a new, more intense strain of humiliation. The next day, the neighborhood email group was buzzing with a link to a video titled Midnight Raccoon Inspection. The failure taught her a valuable lesson. She couldn't do this alone. She needed an asset. She tried pumping the cheerful UPS driver, a young man named Leo. "Lots of deliveries for number 12, huh?" she asked casually one afternoon, as he dropped off a package for her, a new book on identifying and combating narcissistic neighbors. "Oh, yeah, Mr. Chin's my best customer," Leo said brightly. "Tons of computer parts. Super heavy stuff. Told me he's building the ultimate home media server. Wants to be able to stream movies in 16K to his cousin in Finland or something. Cool. Dude always gives me a cold water bottle. A media server. It was the perfect cover story. Plausible, yet just mundane enough to be a lie. The cousin in Finland was a nice touch, a clever piece of misdirection. No, this was bigger. She needed to escalate. She needed an ally. But who was left? Gerald, the spineless treasurer. The traitor who had voted against her. He was her only option. She knew his weaknesses. He craved structure. He was terrified of chaos. And his wife, Janet, held his cowardice in open contempt. Karen could work with that. She invited him over for coffee. An invitation he accepted with the enthusiasm of a man summoned for a root canal. He sat stiffly on her sofa, avoiding eye contact with the investigation board, which loomed over the room like a shrine to madness. "Gerald, I know we've had our differences," she began, her voice soft and full of manufactured concern. "But this is no longer about me, or the board, or Alexis. This is about the safety of our homes. Karen, please." The board voted. The board was blind. She interrupted, leaning forward. "Gerald, you're a numbers man, an accountant. You understand things others don't. Have you felt it?" "Felt what?" he asked, looking genuinely confused. "The hum, the power? That man is running something in his garage that is not normal. That much equipment, that much electricity. Think of the fire hazard. Think of the strain on our local power grid. His hobby could burn our neighborhood to the ground." She saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. She was in. "I need your help," she said, playing her trump card. "You're the treasurer. You understand utilities. There must be a way to find out how much power he is actually using, officially, legally, as a concerned citizen exercising his right to oversight." Gerald hesitated, but Karen could see the gears turning in his head. It was a concrete task, a problem with numbers, something he understood, and perhaps a way to redeem himself in his wife's eyes by being proactive about a potential threat. "There is a provision," he admitted slowly. "Under the State Public Utility Commission, ratepayers can request anonymized block-level consumption data for analysis of grid strain. It's an obscure process, but it's possible." "I knew I could. Count on you, Gerald," Karen said, smiling. You're a true pillar of this community. It took a week. A week of Karen adding more details to her board satellite trajectory theories, cross-references of component manufacturers while Gerald navigated a bureaucratic maze of forms and official requests. Finally, he called her, his voice a panicked whisper, "I have it. Meet me at your place. Now." He arrived looking like he'd seen a ghost, clutching a manila folder. He spread the documents on her coffee table. They were a series of charts and graphs showing the hourly electricity consumption for the 6 houses on their cul-de-sac. The data was anonymized. Each house represented only by its lot number, lots 1, 3, 5, 7, and Karen's own number 14, all showed predictable patterns. A small spike in the morning as people got ready for work, a lull during the day, another larger spike in the evening for cooking, lights, and television. And then there was lot 12. It wasn't a curve, it was a solid wall of pure consumption. It dwarfed the other 5 houses combined. Its baseline usage, even at 3 a.m., was higher than the other 5 houses' peak usage during dinner time. The chart showed a massive, steady drain of kilowatts, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It wasn't the energy signature of a house. It was the signature of a small factory, or a research lab, or sniff. The power surge had changed everything. It was no longer a theoretical threat documented on a chart. It was a physical event that had violated the sanctity of Karen's own home. It was an attack. Gerald, her last tenuous ally, had seen it that way, too. After the lights flickered back to life, he had simply stared at her, his face a mask of pure terror. "This isn't a zoning issue. Karen," he'd stammered, backing towards the door. "I don't know what this is, but it's not something for the HOA, or for me. I'm out. My blood pressure. Janet would kill me." He fled into the night, leaving the damning evidence of the power charts on her coffee table like a grenade. With the pin pulled, his desertion didn't deter Karen, it galvanized her. She was alone, yes, but that only meant she was the last bastion of sanity in a neighborhood of cowards. She was the shepherd, and the flock was too stupid to see the wolf, building a death ray in their midst. She took the power charts, smoothed them out, and placed them in a new crisp manila folder labeled Exhibit A, Energy Anomaly. Her first move was logical, direct, and a complete disaster. The next morning, she dressed in a gray suit that screamed concerned citizen, and drove to the headquarters of the Harmony Creek Municipal Power and Light Company. She felt a surge of confidence as she walked into the bland corporate lobby. She was armed with data. The system would have to listen. She was directed to a customer service cubicle, occupied by a young woman with neon pink hair and a name tag that read Star, who was listlessly scrolling through her phone. "I'm here to report a grave and immediate safety concern," Karen announced, her voice resonating with importance. Starla looked up, her expression one of profound boredom. "Is it a downed power line?" "It's worse," Karen said, leaning in conspiratorially. "It's a catastrophic power drain at a single residential property, 12 Serenity Lane. It's a fire hazard of epic proportions." She slid Exhibit A across the counter. Starla glanced at the chart, her brow furrowed in mild confusion. She tapped a few keys on her computer. "Okay, 12 Serenity Lane. Mr. D. Chen. More typing. Yeah, he's on the H7 high tariff. Looks like he paid a pretty hefty commercial-grade deposit when he moved in. His account is fully current. Actually, it's prepaid through the end of the year." "You don't understand," Karen insisted, her voice rising. "Look at the usage. It's not normal. He could cause a blackout. He could set the entire block on fire." Starla sighed, the sound of 1,000 crushed dreams. "Ma'am, with the H7 tariff, you can basically use as much power as you want as long as your wiring is up to code and you pay for it. He's paying for it lavishly. If his wiring is faulty, that's a city code enforcement issue, not ours. He's a model customer. Is there anything else I can help you with?" Dismissed. She had been dismissed by a girl named Starla. Karen snatched her folder back, her face flushed with anger. The system wasn't just broken, it was actively complicit. Chen wasn't just a rogue actor. He had bought his way into the infrastructure. Returning home, she found her sense of violation had deepened. The house felt wrong. Her Wi-Fi, usually rock solid, kept dropping out. Her smart television, a top-of-the-line Samsung, switched its input from HDMI 1 to the streaming menu, seemingly at random. One afternoon she returned from a grocery run to find her garage door wide open, gaping at the street. At first, she dismissed them as glitches, but as they continued, a new, chilling theory began to form on her investigation board. These weren't random malfunctions, they were targeted side effects of whatever massive electromagnetic field he was generating next door. Or worse, they were intentional incursions. Little digital warnings. He was playing with her. Her paranoia now had a soundtrack, the incessant low hum from his garage and a series of strange, inexplicable plugs. She bought an EMF meter online. The moment it arrived, she switched it on. The needle stayed placidly in the green zone throughout her house. But as she approached the wall she shared with Chin's property, the needle twitched, then swung violently into the red, the device letting out a frantic, high-pitched squeal. It was proof. Her home was being irradiated with something. She updated her strategy. The power company was a dead end. She needed to attack from a different angle. She spent a day meticulously crafting a new complaint, this time for the City Code Enforcement Office. She avoided any mention of conspiracies or power charts. She kept it dry, procedural, and impossible to ignore. She cited 3 potential violations. Section 4.1.2 Operation of an unpermitted commercial enterprise in an R1 designated residential zone. Section 7.3.5 Potential electrical fire hazard due to sustained, non-standard high-load activity. Section 9.2.1 Creation of a public nuisance via persistent, audible low-frequency noise emissions. It was a work of art. 2 days later, a white city van pulled up to the curb. A young man in a collared shirt with a City of Harmony Creek logo got out. His name was Kevin, and he had an earnest, slightly overwhelmed look about him. Victory was at hand. Karen watched from her window, her EMF meter clutched in her hand like a religious talisman. She watched Kevin ring the doorbell. She watched David Chen answer, dressed in his usual quiet attire. He didn't look surprised or angry. He smiled, listened patiently to Kevin, and then, to Karen's horror, he gestured for him to come inside. The door closed, leaving Karen to pace in her living room, her mind racing. What was happening in there? Was Chen showing him the full, terrifying extent of his operation? Or was he showing him a clever facade? A Potemkin garage with a ping-pong table and some neatly stored boxes. 30 minutes later, the door opened. Again, Kevin and Chen emerged. They were laughing. Chen said something, and Kevin nodded, a broad smile on his face. They shook hands. Chen even gave him a bottle of water for the road. As Kevin drove away, Chen looked up, his gaze sweeping across the street, past Karen's window, as if she were nothing more than a piece of the landscape. The official report arrived in her email the next afternoon. It was a methodical execution of her hopes.re, complaint number 774B, 12 Serenity Lane. An on-site inspection was conducted by Officer K. Bailey. Findings are as follows. 1. No violation of Section 4.1.2. Resident provided all necessary permits for a privately operated, non-commercial in-home data processing facility. The use case falls within the home office and hobbyist exemption. 2. No violation of Section 7.3.5. All electrical systems, including high-load wiring and sub-panels, were found to be professionally installed, fully compliant with municipal code, and recently certified by a licensed master electrician. All heat dissipation systems are functioning within safety parameters. 3. No violation of Section 9.2.1. Decibel readings taken at property line were found to be within the 45 dBA limit for nighttime residential zones. The low-frequency hum registered at 22 dBA, well below the actionable threshold. Conclusion: no violations found. Case closed. In-home data processing facility. Karen stared at the phrase. It was a name, a designation, it was a clue. She spent the next 10 hours in a frantic, sleepless plunge into the depths of the internet. She started with data processing and fell through a rabbit hole of server farms, cryptocurrency mining operations, and private cloud hosting. The power consumption made sense for crypto mining, but the satellite dish didn't. The cryogenic cooling was overkill. Then she found it. A series of articles on the fringes of tech journalism about the rise of sovereign data havens, private, untraceable data centers used by corporations, billionaires, and potentially rogue states to store their most sensitive information off the grid. The articles spoke of immense power needs, bespoke cooling solutions, and the necessity of redundant high-bandwidth satellite uplinks to bypass terrestrial networks. Everything clicked into place with the force of a physical blow. The secrecy, the shredded documents, the impenetrable digital security, the astronomical power. The satellite dish pointing straight up. He wasn't mining Bitcoin. He wasn't streaming movies to his cousin in Finland. He was harboring the world's most dangerous secrets. He was a digital pirate, a mercenary of information, operating out of a suburban house in Harmony Creek, and she, Karen Covington, was the only person who knew. This was no longer a matter for the city. This was bigger. This was federal. Her final escalation would be her greatest. She would take her findings to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. She spent the entire next day compiling her masterwork, the Chen dossier. It was a thick 3-inch binder containing everything. It had the power charts, her timeline of his activities, the condescending report from the power company, the toothless inspection summary from the city, which she now saw as proof of a cover-up, photos of the delivery crates, and a multi-page footnoted summary of her new sovereign data haven theory, complete with printouts from the conspiracy websites she now frequented. This was too sensitive for an email or a phone call. It required a personal touch. She put on her most formidable suit, the dark navy one she'd worn for her first HOA election victory, and drove the 40 miles to the J. Edgar Hoover building in the city. Walking into the imposing, sterile lobby of the FBI field office was the most terrifying and exhilarating moment of her life. She was no longer a disgraced busybody. She was an anonymous citizen hero, about to blow the whistle on a threat to national security. She was acting enemy. The drive home from the FBI field office was a journey through a newly terrifying world. Every pair of headlights in her rearview mirror belonged to one of his agents. Every flicker of a traffic camera was his eye, recording her panic. The familiar logos on the sides of telecommunication, Vance AT&T, Verizon now seemed like sigils of his vast, invisible empire. He wasn't just in her neighborhood. He was in the very bedrock of the modern world. She had tried to report a spider to the keepers of the web, not realizing the spider had built it. When she reached the sanctuary of her home, it felt like no sanctuary at all. It was a glass cage. He could see her through her laptop, listen through her phone, watch through the smart TV she'd been so proud of. The house, once her fortress of order, was now just the primary node in his surveillance network. Her reaction was primal. She stormed through the house, a whirlwind of desperate countermeasures. A thick piece of black electrical tape was slapped over her laptop's camera. The smart speakers in each room were unplugged and thrown into a closet. She took her iPhone, the device that had shown her the face of her own terror, and, recalling a frantic article she'd read online, sealed it in a Ziploc bag and placed it in the back of the microwave, a makeshift Faraday cage. For the first time in 15 years, Karen Covington was completely offline, but it wasn't enough. He could still see through the windows. She spent the next hour pulling down her expensive custom-made curtains and tacking thick blankets over the panes, plunging the immaculate sun-filled house into a gloomy, oppressive twilight. She lived like this for 2 days, subsisting on canned soup and the stale crackers from an emergency kit Richard had insisted they buy years ago. She was a prisoner in her own home, hiding from an enemy who knew her every move. The silence, once broken only by his hum, was now absolute, and 1,000 times more terrifying. On the third morning, something new appeared. Propped against her front door was a simple, high-quality ivory envelope. There was no stamp, no postmark, just her name, Karen, printed in a clean sans-serif font. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She snatched it inside, locking the deadbolt behind her, as if the paper itself might attack. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of matching ivory cardstock. The message was brief and printed in the same clean font. The noise and the network interference will cease. We need to talk. My house tonight, 8 p.m. Come alone. We can resolve this. David, it was an invitation and an ultimatum. The offer to end the digital plagues that haunted her was the bait. The meeting was the trap. Her every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to stay barricaded in her tomb of blankets and fear. But 2 days of terror had hollowed her out, leaving behind a gnawing, desperate curiosity. What did he want? Who was he? This invitation, terrifying as it was the only path to an answer. To stay hidden was to live in this fear forever. To go was to face the monster and learn its name. Her decision was not one of courage, but of exhaustion. She had no other moves left to make. At 7:58 p.m., Karen Covington walked out of her dark, sealed house into the warm evening air. She had changed into a simple black dress, stripping herself of the power suits that now felt like a foolish costume. She felt naked, vulnerable, a tribute walking toward the altar of the Minotaur. The short walk across the perfectly manicured lawn separating their properties felt like the longest journey of her life. She reached his front door and hesitated, her hand hovering over the doorbell. Before her knuckles could make contact, the door swung silently inward. David Chen stood there. He was not dressed in his usual casual wear, nor the professional attire from the HOA meeting. He wore a simple dark sweater and comfortable-looking trousers. His expression was not triumphant or menacing. It was one of mild, academic curiosity. "Karen," he said, his voice calm, "thank you for coming, please." He stepped aside, gesturing her in. The interior of his house was the first shock. It was the antithesis of a villain's lair, where her home was filled with ornate furniture, collections, and the clutter of a life lived for presentation. His was a testament to minimalist order. The floors were polished concrete. The walls were white and bare, save for a single, large, abstract painting. The furniture was sparse, functional, and beautiful. It was more peaceful, more harmonious, than her own home had ever been. A soundproofed heavy-duty door was the only sign that this house contained a secret. "Would you like some tea?" he asked, heading towards a sleek, modern kitchen. "I have a very nice oolong." "No," Karen said, her voice coming out harsher than she intended. "I'm not here for tea. What do you want?" David nodded, accepting her refusal without offense. He leaned against the kitchen counter, his posture relaxed. "I want what you want, Karen. I want to be left alone to do my work in peace." "Your work," she scoffed, a flicker of her old fire returning. "Running a secret data haven for criminals? Spying on federal agents? Terrorizing your neighbors?" He listened to her accusations without interruption. When she finished, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "You have a remarkable imagination, but you're incorrect. I'm not a criminal, Karen. I'm a research scientist." He paused, letting the words settle. "The organization I work for is a private, international consortium. We are engaged in what is colloquially known as SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. But we are better funded and more advanced than the public-facing programs. Karen stared at him, her mind refusing to compute. Aliens? This was about aliens. The servers in my garage, he continued, his tone becoming that of a patient lecturer, are not storing state secrets. They are processing petabytes of raw signal data from a deep space radio telescope array. Our consortium operates in the Atacama Desert. The satellite on my roof is a dedicated uplink to control that array and download the data. The power consumption is for the immense computational load required to scan for non-natural patterns. The hum you hear is the cryogenic system required to cool the processors. He looked at her, his gaze direct and unflinching. Our work is, as you can imagine, highly sensitive. There are rival consortiums, even governments, who would go to great lengths to access our data first. As such, my home, which is really just a remote analysis node, is protected by a rather aggressive automated security protocol. He gestured vaguely around them. When you started filing frivolous HOA complaints, the system flagged you as a low-level nuisance. When you started snooping in my bins and filing official city complaints, it escalated your profile to a potential corporate security threat and began passive monitoring. When you walked into an FBI field office with a dossier on my activities, you triggered a level 5 protocol. The system perceived it as an imminent attempt to seize our assets and automatically compromised the building's network to assess the threat. It's a defensive measure, Karen, a very effective one. It was never meant for you to see. The truth was so much larger, so much more bizarre and mundane than any of her theories, that it left her breathless. All her work, her investigation, bored. Her terror, it was all because she was a bug in the ointment of a man who is listening for little green men. She felt a profound wave of dizziness. The foundation of her righteousness, her fear, her entire crusade, had crumbled to dust, leaving her feeling small, foolish, and cosmically insignificant. So you knew everything, she whispered. The system knew. He corrected her gently. I was only alerted when you became a level 5 threat. I must admit, I was impressed by your tenacity. He pushed himself off the counter. Which brings us to my offer. I cannot stop my work, but I can and will make adjustments. I will install an additional layer of acoustic insulation around the garage. I can also install a localized Faraday cage to prevent any further electromagnetic interference with your property. Your Wi-Fi will be stable. Your garage door will stay closed. He paused, his eyes locking on hers. In return, the investigation ends. No more complaints, no more reports, no more dossiers. You will leave me to my work, and I will ensure my work no longer bothers you. This is the only peaceful resolution I am prepared to offer. I am, as you've discovered, very good at protecting my work from disruptions. The subtext was clear. This was the carrot. The stick was the unspoken threat of what else his system was capable of. Karen looked around the pristine, quiet room, at this calm, brilliant man who had so effortlessly dismantled her entire world. She had lost. It wasn't even a war. It was a fly swatting at a cannonball. All she could do was accept the terms of surrender. Fine, she said, the word tasting like ash. You have my word. Leaving his house, she walked back across the lawn under the stars, which now seemed to be watching her with a mocking twinkle. Her grand enemy wasn't a villain. He was just a man with a strange job, and she was the nosy neighbor who had finally, painfully, learned to mind her own business. A week later, the world had been put back together, albeit in a slightly different shape. The hum from next door was gone, replaced by an almost unnerving silence. Her internet was faster than ever. Richard had called. His anger subsided, suggesting they meet for dinner to talk things over. Barb's lawsuit had been downgraded too, a settlement negotiation which Richard's insurance company was now handling. Life was returning to a quiet, manageable normal. Karen was on her